Good afternoon. I'm Kijo Lee, Assistant Director of Academic Affairs at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Welcome to Close Looking at a Distance. So we want to give guests a few more moments to log in. So we'll get going, really going, in a moment. Please use this time to familiarize yourself with the chat interface to the right of your screen, which is our communication hub. To join the chat, just enter your name or any name and click to agree to the terms of service and privacy policy. You can use this chat to make comments during the program at any time. And if you have any questions, pop it in the chat as well, as I'll be following along, and your input will help to guide our focus. Below the viewing window, you'll find a list of any web resources that we reference during the program, including a link to a survey that we use to learn more about you. We greatly appreciate your participation, as these surveys help us to better serve our audiences. Please note that this program is being recorded, so you can watch later on the CMA website or on our YouTube channel. Since we can't gather in the galleries, we've taken the experience virtual. This is an interactive, guided looking program that promotes sustained attention to works of art to expand our understanding of our world and of each other. This week, we're lucky to have Andrea Vazquez de Arthur, Mary and Lee Carter Director's Research Fellow at the CMA and Curator of Fashioning Identity Mola Textiles of Panama, joining us. Welcome, Andrea.
Thanks, Kijo. I'm so happy to be here today.
We're really happy to have you. And so during last week's desktop dialogue, Andrea Capetta, Andrea, and Leonardo Perez Carreño from the Museo de la Mola in Panama City discussed the making and more spiritual meanings of molas in Guna society. And while we're closed to the public for a bit, we're going to take this opportunity and our good fortune to have the curator with us to take a closer look at both the more terrestrial concerns in molas by viewing two rare examples of political molas from the show and what they say about Guna women's role in politics, as well as to explore the exhibition a little bit more so you can get a taste of what you can anticipate whenever we're able to reopen. So let's begin with the exhibition entry. And so what you should see in our audience is a deep blue wall with a large orange and yellow text that reads Fashioning Identity Mola Textiles of Panama, with smaller unreadable text below. There's also an example of a blouse, with a mola in place. Andrea, can you tell us a bit about what inspired this exhibition and how it came together?
Oh, sure. So this show celebrates several gifts that have entered the museum's collection over the years, and also features generous loans from Denison University in Granville, Ohio, which holds one of the most important Guna collections in the United States. It's a great opportunity to show our visitors the complexity and significance of molas. So for background, the term mola means cloth or clothing and refers to a special type of blouse made by Guna women, as well as men who identify as women, and worn as a key component of their traditional dress. Since their development around the turn of the 20th century, they have become a powerful symbol of Guna cultural identity. What's interesting is that in the 1920s, the Panamanian government actually tried to make wearing molas illegal in an effort to assimilate the Guna population into mainstream society. But the Guna revolted in 1925 and ultimately won complete sovereignty over their territory, known as Cunayala. And today, the mola is a source of national pride and a symbol of Panama recognized worldwide.
Thank you. Yeah, so this example of how national ideology, sovereignty, and pride can be stitched right into one's clothing. Molas are a really beautiful example of that. And maybe if we can look at another installation shot, because it's my understanding that each mola carries like a specific motif and that they can be read in a variety of ways. And we have 6 examples on this wall shown. Can you tell us a bit more about that idea of how motifs can relate to meaning, and what you're hoping viewers would take away as they approach this wall that reads How to Look at a Mola?
Absolutely. So This wall it's in the entryway of the exhibition opposite the introductory wall. So it's in the hallway just outside the exhibition, and it's meant to sort of prime viewers, visitors on what they're looking at and how to kind of appreciate the images on molas. Um, so the mola blouse is made from 2 hand-sewn cotton panels, which are made in pairs. And these panels are also usually referred to as molas.
Mm.
So this wall is really meant to introduce our visitors to the unique aesthetic values of Cuna molas, which can be found in the 6 examples here, but also throughout the exhibition. There's a focus on the importance of craft in the production of beauty, in compositional elements of duality and equilibrium, and
Mm.
also a little bit about the dense filler elements that fill every inch of the panel with some kind of activity. Um, Maybe we can look at a couple closer views of 2 molas so we can look more closely at their motifs.
And before we move there, I just want to say that we are already getting comments from the audience fantastically. And so Valerie is noting that it's interesting that men who identify as women are able to wear these blouses as well, because we've been focusing a lot on how molas are typically or only really worn by women and crafted by women, but it allows us to think also about gender and identity in Kuna society a bit as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really
Um,
interesting, their interpretation of gender and gender fluidity there.
yeah. And then, so sorry, and please continue giving us this a little bit of a description of what we're seeing here.
Sure. So these 2 molas that we see here, they represent basically different eras of mola making. So the one on the left is an older mola. It dates to probably about the 1920s and 30s. Um, it's much larger than the other molas in the exhibition, and it's made completely out of reverse applique, whereas later molas start to incorporate more use of surface applique and also embroidery in addition to reverse applique. Um,
Mm.
so what you see is a blue layer over a red layer over a orange layer. And these images are created by layering different colors of cotton fabric and then cutting out patterns from the top layer, folding back the edges and sewing it down to reveal the layer underneath. So with this mola on the left, that's been done um, not just once but twice to show that kind of triple color outlining. Um, the
Mm.
designs from the molas of that era are very abstract and often labyrinth-like, although you can see some kind of figurative images tucked in there. And they carry a very protective quality because they're meant to protect the wearer from malevolent spirits in a sort of parallel universe that carries
Mm.
um, sort of spiritual doubles of anything in the material world. The one on the right dates probably to more around the mid 20th century, and it incorporates a number of layers of cotton fabric, but also pieces of many different colors that have been either tucked in or appliqued on top of the surface. So the image is really
Mm.
created very three-dimensionally by cutting down into the layers and then also building up with surface applique. And here, even though the image is more representational, we can see 2 birds, there's still that reference to this sort of doubling of the, perhaps to reference this spiritual double that everything has in the material world.
Mm.
Doubling and duality are very common themes in mola designs.
Yeah. Or even mirroring. I'm wondering if we could, sorry,
Mm.
this wasn't planned, but I wonder if we could take a step back to the labyrinth. And maybe I'm not sure if we can perfect. Thank you. So in our comments, someone was wondering, A, are molas exclusive to Panama? Um, uh, or are they sorry, excuse me. Mary L is saying that they have molas from Colombia. the Kali Buga region. And then also, I think a different Mary is asking, was Keith Haring inspired by molas, right? So looking at this one in particular,
Mm.
there's sort of a figure in that sort of, if you were to think of it in quadrants, in the sort of lower right quadrant, there's this figure shape that kind of reminds me of Keith Haring as well. So, but thinking about
It does.
um, are molas exclusive to Panama?
Those are great questions. So the Kuna people, they do kind of they came from the sort of interior Darien Gap region that is the thick rainforest between what is now today Colombia and Panama, and they migrated to the
Mm,
coast. And there are Kuna communities. Most of them are on the Panamanian side of the border, but some are on the
mm,
Colombian side. So the Kuna society kind of crosses that border. Um, the practice of mola making started rather late into the colonial era. Actually, it was not too long, a couple decades before Panama gained its independence. So the mola making cultural practice, it kind of more
mm.
solidified closer to when that border became a division. So I think the mola making and wearing is more common on the Panamanian side, but there is some on the Colombian side as well.
Thank you. And I want to take a moment. I think we should actually move to look at to the two political molas so that we can also, to Karen's request, take a little bit, talk a little bit more about technique as we talk about content. And so for our audience, what we've noted is that mola making is incredibly complex. And what we want to maybe just think about is these two examples of political mola that are in the show. Could we actually look at the installation shot first? I apologize. I think we moved a little bit quickly. Thank you. And so, Andrea, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what we're seeing here in the installation, and then we'll take a closer look at the examples.
Sure. So these are two, well, two pairs of politically themed molas from the mid 1980s, and they're on the opposite side of the introductory wall, kind of in a area by themselves. Political molas are something of a subcategory within mola making.
Mm,
What's interesting is in 1946, Kuna women gained the right to vote when Panama awarded suffrage to all women in Panama. And at that time, they started to make molas that reflected political candidates and campaigns and political parties that were active. So they show really a deep awareness of what's going on in the political landscape in the country at large. Um,
mm,
Most of the political molas that we find date to this period from just in the late 1940s up through 1968. At that time in Panama, there was a military coup in 1968, and political parties were then banned until 1980. So they stopped producing them. Um, but what we have are, so you're seeing two pairs of political molas. Each pair came from a single blouse. So here
mm.
they're attached together kind of artificially, but they would have each been originally sewn into and worn as
Wonderful.
blouses. Mhm.
Thank you. And I think, if we can go to our first set of our first pair, focus on that. Thank you. I'd like to ask our audience to just take a moment to look at this pair of panels, because the first thing that I noticed as different from the other two more common motifs that we were looking at is the introduction of text into the pieces. So I'm asking our audience, what do you notice as you're looking at this? Please put your comments and questions into the chat. And I just want to note, Andrea, that as you were speaking about these two molas, we got a few more comments and questions from our audience. One is several people have noted that they own molas. We have Mark, who noted that they have two, like the one, like the enclosed birds that they bought in Panama in the 80s. We have Nathaniel, who noted that he transited the Panama Canal for the first time, 20, a bunch of these then, and that the price has gone up exponentially since then, and that how he wishes he brought more because they're so beautiful. Great, thank you. And now we have some comments coming in. So seeing both human figures and words in this composition of the pair that we see here. Nathaniel's asking, it says Partido Liberal, and then like Partid Beral. So thinking about what this might actually say, I'm noticing that even if we look at the figures across the bottom, it feels like a procession to me of some kind. They're asking if we might translate the language.
Sure. So it does say Partido Liberal, which translates to Liberal Party. It's a political party that was active in the 1980s. I think it may have been resurrected from an earlier instance, but they became the Partido Liberal Nacional, the full name, the National Liberal Party in the 1980s. So spelling tends to be a little bit funky on a lot of these molas. And yeah, down below where it kind of doesn't quite spell it out, just before the B, you can see this very skinny line that's the L, like it got sort of forgotten and then had to be kind of stitched in at the end. And then some of it's quite common to see words that have the letters kind of mixed up or sometimes turned around facing the wrong way. The Guna people, much like really all of South America, didn't have any form of writing or alphabet before the colonial period. So, there's an interesting, like, complex relationship with writing. Yeah.
Thank you. And maybe if we can get in a little bit more. Sorry. Go ahead, Andrea. Go ahead.
I was just going to say in the flags, if you can zoom in on the flags, you can see vicepresidente, which means vice president. Although we don't see any named candidate on these pieces.
And can we move down to where we see that little processional of figures below the flag? Thank you, because in our comments, let me see if I can find it again. I wanted us to think a little bit about what we're noticing here and maybe what's happening in this mola by looking at what we notice. We have here, yes, human figures and words. The figures, Diane Harper notes that the figures look to be holding a banner or maybe walking among the people. What gives you the sense that they're walking or moving here? And then maybe what can you describe the scene that we're perhaps witnessing here? And maybe thinking about, let's see, on the left, it looks like it's speech bubbles. Can we pull out just a little bit? So you mean above those small figures, maybe it looks like there's speech bubbles above their head where we have that embroidery, and maybe and then we have this very dramatic black background. I wonder if, Andrea, you might walk us a little bit through what we're seeing, whether it is embroidery or reverse appliqué or appliqué. Is there a place on this patch that we might be able to zoom in on that would give us sort of variety?
Sure. So the black is the top layer, and it can be hard to, just from looking at an image like this, to discern which parts are reverse versus surface appliqué. but one kind of clue is just seeing how widespread the colors are. So my guess would be that there is a layer of uh, orange and red and yellow that runs maybe throughout the whole piece. That could be full layers of fabric laid on top of each other, and so you see that kind of broader shape of the figure with the flags, kind of with those multiple outlines and colors, and those that tends to signal that that's done in reverse applique. Whereas the inside of the letters on the flag are all done with different colors and are going to be. It's hard to know exactly if it's a combination of fragments of different colored textiles that have been slipped in and between the layers, or if it's all surface applique that's just kind of adding color to the letters.
Mm.
And the
And so,
embroidery
and
you can see as the really
yeah.
skinny lines. Sorry, yeah, the really skinny lines that you see kind of on the faces. That's embroidery.
So maybe, yeah. So yes. So, excuse me. So in that orange and red outline, that is where we're seeing a little bit of that reverse applique. So those where the cut and basted on top of the black, and then we're
Yeah.
seeing the individual stitching of those dotted lines that are sort of articulating the face of this one figure, and that's embroidery, or that area in the maybe hat that we're seeing on the top
Mm-hmm.
of that figure. Perhaps a demonstration, Diane, absolutely. One of our audience members asked if we're going to see the women actually creating these, not in this conversation. However, if you watch the recording of the desktop dialogue, you can actually see images of the procession of the making of mola, which will give you a better understanding of how this reverse applique truly works. Sharon says that this reminds them of a political cartoon in the US. I would love to hear more about what you see that makes you say that. Maybe we can draw back out again. Because one of the things, and perhaps maybe we should look at the second example of political mola. Thank you. Karen's noting that she saw a piece recently, and it seems that the multicolors are actually small pieces of fabric tucked behind, right? So as you were saying, Andrea, there's always, when you're just looking at the mola, it can be difficult to discern, right? Exactly which came first and how things are applied. And you noted to me in our conversation earlier that some of this is also about a display of technique to other makers. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that? And while we're doing that, you should see on your screen another pair of political mola, and I will ask our audience the same question. What do you notice as you're looking at this pair? And maybe we could draw in just a little bit more closely to give folks a sense of how this one might be different than what the one we were just looking at. And if you all would note some of the similarities and difference you might see. Thank you. And Andrea, yeah, if you
Sure.
could.
So what's interesting about this one versus the one we just looked at, the one we just looked at had basically the same image repeated on both sides of the blouse. This one, there are two images that clearly go together and are made sort of as a matching pair, but the images themselves are a little bit different. And you can see the same Partido Liberal in the corners, and you can see Vota por Liberal, which means vote for liberal, on the part below. So what I kind of interpret this as is that the top image really looks like sort of a
Well,
person
before we
casting their ballot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's see what our audience thinks. We have a couple of folks who noted that they really loved how detailed the documents are in this image. So maybe we can look a little bit closer. And yeah, you were seeing, yeah, perhaps it's a casting of a ballot. But what do we see that makes us say that that is what's happening here versus the kind of processional or demonstration that we were seeing in the others? We have that these are, Martha says that these are definitely more narrative, maybe in that way that you were saying, Andrea, where we can get more of an idea of the story, because we get more of a sense, additional detail that helps us to understand what is happening in the scene. Let's see. And if this
And the
is casting
sources.
ballot, yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that the sources for somebody had mentioned political cartoons. Interestingly,
Mm,
the sources for some of these political molas can be things like political cartoons printed in newspapers or photographs concerning an election printed in newspapers. So we might be looking at a sort of reinterpretation of a photograph. You know, it's unclear. We don't know for sure, but
but still
yeah,
drawing on what's happening around them, and then literally sewing it into the garments that they would wear.
yeah,
Mark is noting that we know that this is casting ballots because we see this square ballot box, right? So there are these references for voting in some ways, no matter where we might be. Could we slide down to see the other part of this pair? Because Diane is saying that down here versus casting ballots, she sees that they might be perhaps counting them. And I'm
mm,
wondering what you see, Diane, that makes you say counting the ballots. Um, uh, and I want to note that AC also said that in some ways, this stitching, this way of understanding where the black and the red and the orange might meet, at least in that previous mola, is where the background is sort of becoming the foreground in some ways. If you think about how the layers of fabric are then revealed, right? So that thing which was internal becomes external when it's cut through and basted on top. Let's
yeah, that's a
see.
great way to think about them. They're very complex in how they're constructed because that's absolutely right.
Mm,
You see sort of aspects that come forward that are made actually using reverse applique, and then other like the background that's created with all those little um, different colored vertical stripes, those filler
yes.
elements. Those are basically sitting almost at the top. They're just panels of fabric tucked right under the top layer. So it's this real
Could we
interesting
get a bit
play
closer
between.
to the stripes? Just so
Sorry,
that
what?
maybe we can see. I was
Oh,
asking, I
oh
think
yeah.
it's definitely manipulating the image. If we could get a bit closer to those stripes so that then maybe we can
Mm,
see a bit more what you're talking about.
sure.
Thank you. Yeah, so we can
Yeah.
see it because it actually looks like embroidery from afar, but then when you get up close, you can see where that pink is actually showing through the black, um, or where the orange and red, like the red is somehow below that orange, but then the yellow seems to somehow be above the first line of red and below the second. So they are these really complex surfaces.
Yeah.
James asked, "How large are these? And would they have been distributed at a campaign or as a pin, or would they be worn as traditional mola as part of a blouse?" Um, uh,
They're all made to be worn as part of a blouse. In this sense, when you see them worn as pairs, they do make molas for just for sale on the tourist market. But this they're kind of cover the lower half of the torso. Um,
mm,
so sort of the belly area from the sort of chest to the tummy area. Um, and so they're not huge, but they're also not tiny. And it's
mm,
interesting. We're not really sure how they were used. It's kind of easy for us to imagine them as sort of the way we see people wearing graphic T-shirts that sort of express their opinion and kind of say it to the world. But molas are a little bit more complex, or just it's not a one-to-one correlation that way. Um, they take quite a while to make, and women sew these sometimes in groups, and basically all women sell or make molas. They make molas for their own use and wear. So pretty much everyone in the society has to be making their own, just like you would make your own clothes. You're making your own molas.
mm,
Um,
mm,
so all those details, all that that precision really speaks to the other women in the community, because they know very well how hard it is to make all those tiny little lines. I mean, when you look at them, they're not just lines, but they are perfect. They're all the
Yeah.
same exact width. They're very
Perhaps we can go
straight. Yeah, the precision in getting those lines to be so uniform in width and spacing is, it just takes an incredible amount of skill. And that goes very much noticed among the Kuna women, because they know exactly what goes into that, into making a mola
back.
like that. Um, so that's,
And I find that
yeah,
fascinating, but so typical, right, of artistic communities, right, where there
mhm.
these sort of, you're developing new techniques together, but you're also looking at the fineness of each other's work, critiquing it, wanting to get better at the creation of it.
Mhm.
We had a question in the audience of, are these all always hand stitched? And
Yes, they are. The panels are, yes. Pretty
yeah,
much.
so
I mean, there are some instances of machine sewing, but for the panels, uh, sewing machines really don't work very well with what they need to do, especially with something like this that has so many irregular shapes. Now, the panels, when they're sewn into blouses, the other pieces
mm,
of material, the sleeves and the yoke, that
mhm.
is done with a machine, because that's just straight stitch sewing. So um, but the panels have to be done by hand, especially for pieces like this that are this complex. Um, and as I was saying, they're usually made in groups, and so it's less about, the way we see a graphic T-shirt, somebody wearing a T-shirt that expresses a certain opinion, and they wear it to show the world. While these, when they're worn, there's actually quite a bit of the image gets tucked into their skirts, so you don't really
Mm,
see the whole image when
mm,
they're worn. Rather, it's been suggested that they are kind of conversation starters, in a sense, that when women are working sewing molas together, um, they're talking about what they're making. They're talking about why they chose a certain theme that maybe sparks conversation about, in this case, which political candidate do you support, or why, or like
mm.
it can spark a lot of conversation about important topics, just by being kind of a subject
Yeah.
of social making. Yeah.
Which connects, I think, to what Odessa has noted about how the different patterns that are used, like those little dashes that are across the surface of the molas that we see on the right, that allow you to see even other details more clearly, right? So these aesthetic choices that show like the virtuosity of the stitching, the content, which is important mode of expression, but also this real artistic eye for how you put these things together. So even if we're looking at the molas on the left, that fitting in of those letters, you get in where you fit in, allows us to see this inventiveness that's going along with the creation of these works. Diane noted that she's in awe of the ability of the women responsible for these, and not surprised it takes a long time. And it kind of reminds her of like a quilting group or a quilting bee. Maybe that's what my
Mhm.
grandma used to call them, quilting bees. This idea of a community of women. And maybe you could even talk a little bit more about the role of Kuna women in politics, in Kuna society, because I'm wondering about the wearing of or the creation of these or other kinds of political participation, since it's also like a matrilineal, matrifocal society where money, goods are passed down via the mother's family versus the father's and those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's right. So women, um, typically, when a woman gets married, her husband will move into her house with her family. So within a single household, you will have multiple generations of women, um, of blood-related women. So there's an incredible importance placed on that continuity. And then women, of course, learn to make these from their mothers and grandmothers as they're kind of growing up in the household. Um, Women are also very much sort of celebrated in Kuna society. Um, Special points in a woman's life are kind of celebrated by the whole community. The largest or most important celebrations in the community are the girls coming of age when they are about, I don't know, 13 or so. And they're kind of, they have a coming of age, and that's when they are sort of inducted into sort of the women's society of wearing these molas. So as children, they don't tend to wear them so much, but it's a big celebration. However, women don't traditionally hold positions of power. Those have always been traditionally held by men. The leaders of the communities have usually been men. But as molas have become such a great source of income, to be honest, for the Kuna. I think somebody had mentioned how the prices in molas has shot way up. Yeah, they're very lucrative, and women make quite a lot of money selling used molas, or also like the pair you see, the two pairs you see here, or just using the mola technique to sell souvenirs to tourists and visitors. So because they're able to bring so much money into the communities and into their families, they're now have been starting to gain more positions in power and community leadership as well.
So that economic, political connection. And I want to note that we're getting tons of questions about how these look on clothing. So I think that maybe what we're going to do is transition into, we do have some more installation shots that we want to share with everyone, so that you can get more of a sense of the rest of the exhibition, thinking about what these look like on tops and what you can learn in the exhibition itself. And then before we do that, I just wanted to address a couple of questions, including are molas worn every day on clothing, or is it only on special occasions? And yes, and do the styles and color correspond to specific communities?
Sure. So how they're worn, that can actually vary from community to community. The Kuna live on the Caribbean coast of Panama, just before the border of Colombia, and they live on a number of tiny little islands, and there's about 50-ish distinct Kuna communities all along this archipelago. So some communities, it's more common for women to wear them on a daily basis. Other communities, they may wear, more Western style clothes day to day while they're doing, kind of work, day-to-day work, and then will change into their mola dress for more formal events and meetings and circumstances. So it does vary a little bit in that sense. So this is a great shot of the gallery where you can see that we have both mola blouses and mola panels on exhibition. It's about roughly, I'd say, half and half of the pieces are full blouses versus panels.
Thank you. Let's move to the next one, just because it gives a more of a sense of the blouses. And Odessa asked, what's the rest of the fabric? So, is it mostly, and also someone asked about dyes. Are they primarily vegetable dyes or synthetic dyes that are used in the creation of them?
Sure. So initially they were pretty much all cotton, but I should mention that all the materials that are made, that are used for making these molas, they're all obtained on the international market. So the Kuna do not produce any of their own fabrics. They're all bought from international traders. So initially in the early part of the 20th century, it was all cottons, and now more, as more materials have become more available, they'll often now use more synthetic fabrics, some kind of thinner, almost like almost like a kind of billowy fabrics are really popular in the molas that are being
Mhm.
made now. Um, so the sleeves can be made out of any material. The panels really need to be made of cotton because of the the strength and flexibility of the fabric to do all that careful stitching.
Thank you. And I can't believe it, but we're running out of time. So I just want to give a final sort of question and point from our audience, which are asking about things like markets. So, has mass marketing caused any pressure on the community to move toward machine stitching or less elaborate designs? And also thinking about purchasing mola blouses, right, out in the world, is there a question of authenticity? Are there sort of a politics around the collecting of these objects? Because I think that also touches upon even the politics of showing these kinds of works in a museum like ours. I think that would be a great way for us to close today.
Sure, that's a great question because actually there is a lot wrapped up into that. The Kuna are very protective of their intellectual property. They uh, they want to be sure that when they do like to have their molas collected and sold, and they are happy to sell to visitors who visit Panama or visit Cunayala. Um, but they very much control those chains of sale. So they want to control who sells these molas to the outside world. So, for example, the CMA will have some molas. Hopefully, we'll see some molas and mola products for sale in the store to accompany the exhibition. But we went through great lengths to make sure that those that we purchased um, from intermediaries who had express permission from the Kuna Congress to sell these molas. So, they don't mind having kind of middlemen selling them, but they want to approve and kind of give their blessing to that to make sure that they're being kind of authentically represented. Um, versus somebody who's going to say, scan a mola image and just print it on T-shirts. That would be that.
Yes.
That's very much
Yes.
frowned upon.
Molas are
Yeah.
not fast fashion. I just want to make sure that that I echo all of the thanks for the beautiful exhibition and installation that we're getting in the comments. And I want to thank you again, Andrea, for being with us today to give us a sneak peek of the exhibition, to talk a little bit more about some of the rare examples of molas, but also to touch upon sort of the politics of display of the cultural production, right, of communities like the Kuna. And so thanks again, and thanks to everyone for joining us. Close Looking at a Distance has been made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities. And now my colleague Andrew Capetta will tell you about another virtual exhibition program happening this evening, as well as our last desktop dialogue of the season that will happen on December 16th. Andrew, take it away.
Hey, thanks so much, and what a great conversation. It's amazing. They're such rich objects, the molas, and we could have, I think, an endless number of programs and conversations around them because there's so much to see and say. So first of all, tonight we're going to have a really exciting conversation that's organized in tandem with the recently opened CMA exhibition, Second Careers, Two Tributaries in African Art. As you know, the CMA is sort of, currently or temporarily closed for safety reasons. So it'll be a great opportunity to experience the exhibition online. So tonight at 6 p.m., we're going to have artists Nena Okore and Tahir Carl Karmali, who are both featured in the exhibition. The exhibition curator, Ugochukwu Smusi Nzawi, and our curator of African art, Kristen Windmuller Luna, in conversation about the exhibition's themes of memory, materiality, and transformation, and how contemporary artists engage with traditional African arts. The program is free. Just visit cma.org to get a ticket to receive the link to join the program. So our evening programs are a bit different. We do ticket them, but they are still free. And next Wednesday, as Kijo mentioned, is our last desktop dialogue of the year. It's titled Capturing the Spark. It's on December 16th. Wednesday at noon. And Kijo and I are going to be in conversation about the spark of inspiration that we get from an artwork when seeing it for the first time. And we're going to discuss some recent acquisitions, works that are new to us and to the museum collection. By artists Mickaleen Thomas, Ann Hamilton, and Harry Bertoya, and the sort of connections that they bring to our mind. So we'll see you tonight and next week.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Remember, if you'd like to explore more of the works that we showed or in our collection, you can visit CMA Collection online. And if we didn't get to your question during our conversation today, or you have more, you can always go to Art Lens Ask on the CMA website. The links to both are in the description, and someone will get back to you with an answer. So thanks to everyone for being here. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.